welcome to episode 269, nice, of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford
and Nathan Smith.
In today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our found footage horror series with 2007 or 2009, whatever the hell you want to go by, Paranormal Activity.
Why
so
are you...
Because in 2007, it came out in a film festival, and so people label it as 2007, but it was released like in theaters in 2009. So, I mean,
2009.
like in the end,
And the movie changed between that, so
yeah, it's
Yeah,
just,
no one's seen the
kind of
2007
an interesting
version.
case.
So that's I'm just making a point. We can get into that in part 2. Some real quick notes, though. Head over to cinematary.com. As I mentioned last week, we have our Toronto International Film Festival coverage. Got a long recap as well as some individual reviews of films. We also added another capsule review of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, the Mr. Rogers movie, which you can catch on the site right now from Nick Armstrong. We got Andrew here, who's going to be blogging some stuff from Nashville. So yeah, it's film festival season, people, and get ready. Get ready for all that hot movie content.
We got London Film Festival stuff coming from Logan soon. Also more festival stuff for me about the Knoxville Horror Film Fest in the next couple weeks. So
Wow.
very busy. Yeah.
So all that stuff, cinematary.com. Yeah, that's my pitch early on. Rate and review on iTunes, etc., etc. Let's go ahead and jump into
Patreon. Something
subscribe
Patreon.
to Patreon. Let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. Nathan, I'm going to lead off with you. You saw the fresh new release Gemini Man. So you and your clone, tell us about this.
You bet I did.
What version of it did you watch?
Yeah. Well, let's get into that.
Let's unpack that.
This movie, the new film from Ang Lee, starring Will Smith, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and Clive Owen, is getting attention in some circles, but getting kind of mocked in others, because it is a sort of ambitious technical experiment. It is being released in multiple versions. There is the standard 24 frames per second, or I guess 30 frames per second, 2D, 2K version showing in most theaters.
Why is it 30? Isn't everything 24?
Because digital is 30 frames per second.
Digital is always 30. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then it's also showing in a 60 frames per second 3D version, a high frame rate 3D plus Dolby Vision, as it's being called, also being released in IMAX in 16 Dolby theaters in the United States. It's being released in an exclusive 120 frames per second 3D Dolby version, which is the version that I saw it in, and then in one single theater in the United States and a number of other theaters throughout Asia, it is being showed in a 120 frames per second 3D 4K version.
There's also...
which is the definitive version of the film, but it is literally cannot be showed at like any theater in the United States except for this one theater in Los Angeles. There are newer giant movie palaces in Asia, in China, in Singapore that can show it, but not here, alas.
There's also something called D-Box.
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck that shit is. Honestly, it's like, I don't know. Is that the like?
I mean, it seems like it's like a rumble pack.
I think that
for
I think you're right.
Theater
Is it a sex thing?
It sounds like it. It really sounds like it. The big D, So anyways, this movie is kind of mostly interesting for that reason, for the technical aspect. The script has been floating around for 20 years. It was written originally and sold 1997 by this guy, Darren Limke, who did not have anything produced until 2010 when he worked on the screenplay for Shrek Forever After. He was a grocery store clerk when he sold this movie and a movie about like the black box in Air Force One getting recovered after a crash or something. He sold both of those to Tony Scott and Jeremy Bruckheimer. Basically, every leading man you can think of was attached to this movie at one time or another. Brad Pitt, John Voight, Sylvester Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Clint Eastwood, Tom Cruise, etc., etc. Because it's a movie about an older assassin being chased by his younger clone. It was going to be this like big effects movie. There were some effects tests in the late 90s done by the Secret Lab, which was a Disney-owned studio that most famously did the effects for the movie Dinosaur, which we talked about a few years ago on the podcast. And they were going to do kind of more adult-centered cartoons and effects-heavy movies, but they got shut down and like after only doing Dinosaur. And it was just like the effects weren't kind of considered there for what they really wanted this movie to be, because the premise is kind of generic beyond that kind of effects hook. The script really does, for better and worse, feel like something that's been around since the late 90s. A lot of the jokes are a little kind of like in the Shyamalan sort of corny style. It feels like a Jerry Bruckheimer movie. I can tell why Tony Scott was attached to it, because it's this sort of paranoia conspiratorial spy movie about an agent who's about to retire, an assassin who gets burned, and they send this young clone after him. So like I said, I saw this in like the second most definitive version, and the effects really immediately blew me away. I'm somebody who likes 3D, or at least is like interested in seeing movies in 3D. I don't know if it always works, but at this point, it doesn't really like make me sick that often or anything, or make me feel bad. For certain things, I kind of like to give it a chance. But this is by far the best and the cleanest 3D that I have ever seen. It's like really kind of spotless and seamless. And I wear normal glasses, so 3D glasses can be a little bit of a pain, but I honestly, for the most part, forgot that I was looking through glasses. There are some pretty astonishing sequences in this movie where you're like, feel like you're drowning for a second, and then feel like you're being pulled out of water. The definition and the kind of dimension that it gives it just is really amazing. I mean, at first when you see it, it feels like a little bit like a sort of tilt shifted Instagram photo where it's like a wide shot and all of the figures and all the bodies feel like these little action figures or dolls or something. But I feel like you start to get used to it, and it starts to feel very natural, and you are made very aware, I feel, of the sort of limits of the frame. But it almost feels like watching a sort of 4:3 old Hollywood movie or something like that, where it feels like you're sort of staring into a diorama or some kind of little box, like a shadow box or something. So it has this real feeling of depth, which is mostly like most of the movie, isn't like sort of transparently beautiful until it gets to these kind of action sequences. Like it doesn't really feel sometimes necessary for this technology to be used. Like you don't really understand fully why it was needed for this project until the action sequences hit, because they're just like so clean and seamless, and it does feel very video game inspired. There's a lot of first person perspective kind of cutting in, but it's not like a sort of hardcore Henry type overwhelming, like bashing you over the head. It's just like you can really follow what's going along. There's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of intensity. It feels sometimes like a Michael Mann movie, especially in those action sequences, which are very digital. And the cinematography was done by Dion Beebe, however you say his name. Great cinematographer behind movies like Collateral and Miami Vice and Michael Bay's 13 Hours. So you're just getting a very rich movie. The de-aging that they do on Will Smith on his younger clone, for me, for most of the movie, it works. I will say in the last scene, there's kind of like the last scene you see Will Smith and younger Will Smith in full daylight next to each other for the first time, and it feels a little wonky in that last sequence. But for most of the movie, it really worked. Like, he just has this sort of like, he does feel a little bit like a video game character, but it's in this way where he feels so like virginal almost, just kind of like youthful and in this very innocent way where he just feels like this wounded puppy who's been trained to kill. And it's really kind of an astonishing performance just because you know that, like, even though there's a lot of digital manipulation going on, that Will Smith is doing something visibly different with his body than when he's older, normal Will Smith. And it looks, you know, kind of like Will Smith and Ali or something like that. And, you know, so this movie has good and bad. It is kind of a fairly boilerplate kind of action thriller. It does sort of have this kind of emotional resonance about, you know, relationships between sons and fathers, but also sort of larger political questions about identity and, like, you know, who are we in relation to other people? How do you determine yourself? How do you become who you are? There's, to the surprise of probably nobody who saw Ang Lee's last movie, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, which is also in a high frame rate and is absolutely fucking amazing. Like, one of the most incredible movies I've seen in a long time. I didn't get to see it in theaters, but I watched it recently. This movie also talks a little bit about PTSD, which that movie dealt with really effectively, I thought.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because I know you watched that recently and were really high on it, how... I mean, I know that you didn't see Billy Lynn in theaters, but I mean, what is kind of your take on Ang Lee? You know, why he's kind of using this high frame rate technology in order to tell these specific stories?
Well, could I ask a quick question to add on to that? I'm just wondering, in home video, is the frame rate the way Ang Lee wanted it to be? Is it? I don't really know what the technology around frame rate is, and whether or not it's just a projected thing or if you can put it on a Blu-ray disc. Maybe that's a stupid question.
No, not at all. It's a very confusing, complicated thing that I don't really even fully entirely understand. But so I'll answer both of those. So I feel like there's both a very practical answer, but I also think a creative answer to that question, Zach, about why Ang Lee wants to use the high frame rate. In interviews, he said, you know, he did Life of Pi before Billy Lynn, which was a super effects heavy movie, and it was released in 3D, you know, just kind of the standard 3D, nothing special about it. And he said he was really disappointed with how choppy it looked and how it diminished from the kind of the colors and the overall visual quality of the film. So to keep that up, you know, he started exploring the high frame rate technology because you get a lot less. It does look a little different, and it takes some adjusting to, I think, for a minute, but it does really prevent that quality loss that we sort of come to expect with 3D, which can sometimes be the good thing about 3D. The good thing about 3D can sometimes be that it looks different from a 2D movie, but this is really the first time that I've kind of seen this like work where it's just a very seamless experience overall. But I do feel like he's using this new technology to think about different ways of looking. So in Billy Lynn, he was telling a story about a guy who had gone to war, who'd seen horrible things, who had saved people, killed people, and come back, you know, to come back to the very mundane, normal world is such a shock after that it just, like, you know, it's like this permanent bad trip that he's on. And so the whole world looks a little bit different, and it looks a little bit uncanny to him coming back, you know. And people try to communicate this in movies like The Hurt Locker or You Were Never Really Here or whatever, you know. Sometimes they communicate PTSD through, like, you know, flashbacks cutting in when somebody's in a supermarket or just something very jarring like that. But this is a lot more uncanny and a lot more, like, disquieting, where, like, you have this, like, really pristine, information heavy digital image that is like reality, but then this background will fade in and the memories will fade in and the experience of war will come back. In this, you have some of that. You do have that, some kind of, like, you know, the trauma of war, the trauma of an abusive childhood, whatever kind of pain these characters are going through. You do get that they've kind of been, their way of seeing has been changed and altered and impacted by that. But But it's mostly, I feel like, it's kind of this experiment in tandem with the de-aging, where it's like, if we're going to do that technology, why not go all the way and kind of just change everything about the image, and revolutionize the whole thing, Like, I really, whether or not you feel like it's a good technology that should be used in the future, or it's something that makes you feel uncomfortable, I think there's no way that you can say that this isn't like 10 times the usage of the like de-aging in Rogue One, which was, this total kind of like fan service thing, just in nostalgic recreation of an already existing movie. This is looking towards the future and is saying, if I'm going to experiment with cinema, with digital, with high frame rate and all these new technologies, why not push it to the absolute limit? So on that note, I think it's really successful. It's not the most inspiring script or plot, but I feel like that's kind of the point, that the movie is sort of a clone almost of, existing genre movies and action movies and thrillers. And it's sort of working through that and maybe working through kind of the trauma of those genres as well. So I think it's definitely worth seeing. It's not in too many theaters in the 120 frames per second, and it's probably going to go by the time this episode comes out. But I definitely encourage you to see it in the 60 frames per second 3D plus, if that's in your area. And if not, I think that I guess I didn't really answer your question, Andrew, but I will answer it now. So there's a 4K Blu-ray that's in 60 frames per second of Billy Lynn. With the 4K, you are like, I think there's like enough, those discs have like enough space to, hold that. I do think though, you kind of get the effect of it though, just watching like Billy Lynn normally, just because it looks so different and it looks so much more digital and, bright and just like HD than you're used to, even with digital HD movies, that you can tell like what the effect is supposed to be. So I think that Gemini Man probably still works in some level in 2D, even if it's maybe just a little bit more of a conventional experience or conventional movie. So yeah, I just fucking talked a lot about Gemini Man. I had some thoughts.
You're good. I kind of want to. I'm hoping to check it out. I don't think that they have the version you saw it in around here, but I was gonna go try to find the best case scenario. I mean, God, for God's sake, guys, they filmed the goddamn movie here. Like, help Ang Lee out, give him the best version. Cool. You had another movie you want to talk about?
Yeah, another new movie, which got a very limited theatrical release last month and comes out on Blu-ray this week. The new film from one of my favorite working filmmakers, Rob Zombie. This is 3 from Hell, the sequel to 2005's The Devil's Rejects, which is, of course, a sequel to the 2003 movie House of a Thousand Corpses. This follows the satanic, sadist, depraved criminal trio of the Devil's Rejects, who are called the Devil's Rejects, which are comprised of Baby, played by Sherry Moon Zombie, Otis, played by Bill Moseley, and Captain Spaulding, played by Sid Haig. Rest in peace. In the 2005 movie, they are blown to bits as Freebird by Leonard Skinner plays. And so they're presumably dead, but there's this extended sequence at the beginning of the movie where you find out that they were somehow, despite all being riddled with dozens and dozens of bullets, still alive. And they were all sentenced to decades, life sentences on life sentences in prison. Sid Haig, who you may recognize from movies we've talked about very recently, like Jackie Brown and White Mama, Black Mama. This classic exploitation actor who unfortunately passed away very recently. He was very old, of course, during the filming of this movie, very sick. So he's like super gaunt and only in a few minutes at the very beginning. His character is executed. And of course, Baby and Otis eventually escape with the help of Otis's half-brother, Foxy. So there's a new trio in town who unleash all kinds of hell and mayhem. And then halfway through, they're trying to escape and they go down to Mexico where they run into, who is it? Richard Edson, the classic actor from Jim Jarmusch movies, Ferris Bueller, all those Do the Right Thing, also a member of Sonic Youth. He shows up in this movie, which is the first time I've seen him in a movie, I feel like, in a very long time. Dee Wallace, of E.T. and The Hills Have Eyes and The Howling is also in this movie. Danny Trejo shows up for a second. And, like The Devil's Rejects, it basically just turns into a Sam Peckinpah movie, but with like 10 times the gore. And if The Devil's Rejects was The Wild Bunch, this is Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. Just, like totally depressing and depraved. And I don't know. A lot of people haven't really liked this movie who are normally Rob Zombie fans. The thing about Zombie is he's kind of interesting for a couple reasons, 3 reasons. They're all kind of related, but I feel like he's this sort of cut up artist who has just like seen a lot of horror movies, and like in his music is just sort of taking all these tropes and images that he's absorbed from monster movies and universal horror movies and old slasher movies and doing his own, fucked up metal spin on them. But he's also this kind of like very interested in tacky Americana. And he is also a really interesting artist when it comes to depicting violence, because for him, he is like extremely sympathetic somehow to the people who do violence, but also to the people that violence is done to. There's a real sympathy for victims in his films, and a real kind of, I don't know, it's this emotional, deep understanding of trauma in a way that a lot of people try to do in horror, but is very shallow. Cough, the Halloween remake from last year, Cough. But this movie, I don't know, is like a little bit less emotionally impactful than some of his movies. In that regard, it's still really violent, but I just sort of enjoyed it on the merits of its style alone. There's this fucking insane sequence at the end where Sherry Moon Zombie is like shooting all of these dudes with Tommy guns wearing tuxedos and luchador masks while In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida plays. And so it's just this sort of like, I don't know, insane stylistic kind of excessive thing. And if you like his indulgences, I think you'll probably like this movie. It is really interesting too, as kind of a commentary on media, which is something that I felt like he was working through in The Devil's Rejects a little bit too. But of course now, our like culture is inundated with serial killers and images of serial killers more than it was in 2005. And the first like 20, 30 minutes of this movie, which is sort of following The Devil's Rejects and their time in prison and their escape, is like communicated mostly through like fake news broadcasts and documentary footage. So I don't know. It's just this really kind of fascinating look at like how these cults form around serial killers and around murderous individuals. In a kind of much more, I thought, deeper and compelling way than like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was.
Or the movie we're about to talk about.
I like the movie we're about to talk about.
Oh, have you seen it?
Oh, wait. I thought you were talking about Paranormal Activity.
Oh, no.
I don't know.
No.
I forgot what the next movie we're going to talk about is.
No.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember. But
I honestly though, if Rob Zombie made that movie, it'd be a lot more interesting. I feel like there'd be stuff.
Dude, I would love to see. I mean, because he's got there's a lot of clown stuff in 3 from Hell. There's a lot of clown stuff in all of his movies. I mean, Captain Spaulding is a great murderous clown. Talking about murderous clowns,
they'll figure it out soon.
And also, he's just like very interested in vaudeville too. Rob Zombie is like obsessed with Groucho Marx, and his dream movie is a Groucho Marx biopic. So he's sort of like in touch with the relationship between like vaudeville, comedy, and horror, kind of the sort of freak spectrum. So his movies are really interesting from that perspective too. If you want to use that as a nice little segue into the next film.
Well, 3 from Hell, as you mentioned, it's on Blu-ray and I'm sure streaming and such.
Yeah.
Now.
Is.
So check it out. Yeah. So the movie we were poorly alluding to was Joker. I talked about it a little bit coming out of Toronto, and I wrote a review on it. So I'm going to toss this over to Andrew, who I don't know what bet he lost, but he ended up having to go see this.
I was just curious.
Tell us a little bit about.
I wanted to participate in the discourse, but. It's a movie go ahead.
For those who need like a synopsis,
you don't.
Dude is crazy and becomes the Joker.
It's a movie about the Joker. Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't hate it. I didn't hate the Joker. I was kind of expecting to, and Zach, I think you were expecting me to as well, because back when the movie's release date got announced, you flagged me up to write the review for it. I guess because of
mainly just to be a dick. Honestly,
my gun video essay is kind of related to all this, and also my superhero movies video essay is very much tied up in this too. So, I think that I was primed for this to be a movie that I had a lot of deep-seated issues with. Especially because of the conversation that was happening about it before the movie came out, which a lot to do with this movie being a monument to violent incel culture and anti-PC goons. All those folks were gonna eat this up, and while watching it, I was kind of waiting for the deeply problematic shit to start happening, and it kind of never did. I mean, there's definitely some stuff sprinkled throughout the last half of it that is not great, but I definitely think it's a much more complicated movie than the conversation around it suggested. And I mostly want to talk about. Well, actually, I should first say that I guess I'm slightly more sympathetic to this film just because I found it like surprisingly entertaining. Like about halfway through, I just kind of checked myself getting pretty, swept up in the drama of it, and was like, wow, this is unlike almost every superhero movie that I've seen in the last several years. Like a compellingly acted, compellingly shot, like movie full of tension and drama and suspense and all of those things. And I'm like, wow, this is a real movie. It's gotten a lot of heat for ripping off Scorsese movies, and it's definitely doing that to a certain extent. But in ripping off Scorsese movies, it acts like a real movie. It doesn't act like a weird mishmash of like corporate branded shit that most of the MCU films are. But I mostly want to talk about how this movie relates to politics because of how like weird and contradictory they are. Like there have been a lot of leftist folks on Twitter and YouTube who are trying to reclaim this movie from the far right 4chan goons and use it as a rallying cry for like people not having access to mental health care and people, having really awful dead-end jobs and et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the first half of the film that really like piles on the economic woes of Joaquin Phoenix's character. Meanwhile, like vilifying Thomas Wayne as this awful corporate bigwig who is running for mayor and kind of like running the media and in every way just screwing people over and making himself look good in the process. And so like for the first half of the movie, I could kind of see why people on the far left were trying to celebrate and reclaim this film. But then in the second half, there's a lot of stuff that is actively anti-leftist politics too. Like there are all these straw man mockeries of like Antifa mobs that portraying them as like just like murderous, frenzied, unhinged people. There's you see the slogan used, "Kill the rich," in newspapers, which is like not a leftist slogan. Like "Eat the rich, tax the rich" are things that leftists say, but "Eat the rich" is even used metaphorically. Like nobody is saying just like straight up murder the rich. So I can see like those things being put in there almost as like bait for the Fox News crowd, like kind of feeding their desire to see this, crowd of far left people vilified in the worst way possible. And there's also there are those lines that sound kind of like Todd Phillips on the media junket, where Joaquin Phoenix's character talks about how, people are too sensitive and you can't joke about anything anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But he'll say that like in the same breath that he's talking about how people with money just don't understand the plight of the common man, and it's interesting because you will get the exact like polar opposite political ideals presented within like seconds of each other. And what I ultimately came to with this film is that it is basically designed to get people yelling at each other, just as the Joker might want. It doesn't actually have a true ideology. It is kind of presenting versions of competing ideologies in a way that is, like I said, baiting to both. And there's a scene right after the big climactic one, which I thought was dramatized really, really well, where Joker is in a police car and he's seeing all this anarchy being carried out throughout the city, and things are on fire and things are exploding. He's just like looking out and laughing at it all. And I can't help but think that that's also kind of Todd Phillips looking out at the discourse happening about this movie, like stirring the pot even further, and seeing just how mad he can get various sides against each other. And I kind of have to give it to him. Like it does a really good job at doing that kind of useless thing. And I don't know. I felt strangely compelled by it. Does any of this I'm saying makes any sense to you, Zach?
It makes sense. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it makes sense. I think for sure he presents a lot of these different hot button issues into the narrative, and I guess I am agreeing with you. I just don't necessarily see it as like a interesting note, but like he presents all of these stuff. He's not really, I don't think he's distinctly saying anything or making a statement about anything at all throughout it. He's more just presenting it to kind of present it for narrative's sake, because in the culture of the Joker, it's kind of more just, throwing up a middle finger and not really like exerting any actions. So that's why I don't necessarily like hate the movie. I'm just more deeply dismissive of it, because I'm just kind of like, it doesn't have really anything to say, so it's kind of a stupid movie to be upset about or say anything for. And that's kind of my takeaway from the whole thing, is that it has all of these points that it's making. I don't disagree that like the point of that we don't have well-funded mental health, and yeah, that's true, but like, what are you saying about that? Are you just pointing it out? Because there's a difference between pointing it out and making a point. And I think it's kind of gotten lost in this faux comparison to a lot of Martin Scorsese's movies, specifically Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, because I think that Scorsese is somebody who is distinctly making a point about stuff and will do things that I guess the viewer you can read it as being that he's like trying to or that he's accepting of whatever nature the character's taking part in, but I think that he's much more nuanced in making a commentary on this type of person rather than just kind of showing it for showing's sake. And I don't feel like Todd Phillips is doing that. I think he's just kind of doing it. And doesn't really have like an end game or end goal in place. I think his only end goal in this was that he desperately wants to be like in on the superhero movie craze, because regardless of what he says, this movie desperately like has like a sequel desire in it. And so I think that's the point at the end of the day, is that Todd Phillips really wants to make more superhero movies. He doesn't want to say anything.
I don't know. I didn't get that vibe. I mean, there is definitely a shot near the end of the movie that suggests there are more chapters, but it's suggesting that there are chapters that we've already seen. You know, it's alluding to other Batman movies that have already been made. Not necessarily calling forward to a future project, but just kind of showing how this one links up with the larger mythos that already exists.
Yeah, but I think that just the by nature of like the performance that Joaquin Phoenix is doing, I think just that in itself is asking for more from it, because a lot, like, even from people who didn't like the movie, a lot of people still go, Joaquin Phoenix gives a really great performance in it. And so I just feel like by the nature of that performance, I just don't feel like, and this doesn't even have to do with like the narrative of the movie, but just in the culture of movie making that we have today.
There's always going to be another one.
I think that if there's enough interest drawn just from the performance, we'll find a way to make another movie. And so I don't know. Like I said, it's a movie. I don't hate it. I just am like, it's honestly, the discussion around it is so desperately boring, at least to me personally, that I just don't want to talk about it.
I walked out of it desperately wanting to talk to people about it, like texting my friends who had seen it and texting my friends who hadn't seen it, who I know would have interesting things to say about it. Just like, please, I need to talk to somebody about this movie. Well, I knew you didn't want to talk about it. Sorry, Zach.
That's fair.
I knew that you found this incredibly boring.
Yeah. I'm just like, will somebody text me for my take on? I would have talked about Under the Silver Lake.
Yeah. Another movie that I really wanted to talk to people about, but I was the only person who had seen it like several months ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just, that's my feelings about the Joker, is that it's I don't know, it's too stupid of a movie to really get that worked up about. It doesn't have much to say about anything, so I was like, it was a weird experience. It's still a weird experience to take it in at the Toronto Film Festival, though. There's something really funny and surreal about him introducing Todd Phillips in a festival where, like, the way that you hear every other...
Pedro Costa is also there, yeah.
Yeah, you hear from the director of all three Hangovers, Due Date, and War Dogs, Todd Phillips. I'm like, really? Is that all those like linked to what you stand for at the Toronto International Film Festival? But
Nathan, I would also like to hear your take on Joker if you ever get around to watching it.
Well, I have yet to see it, and I don't know when I will.
To be clear, I am not necessarily saying it is a good movie. It is very interesting, and I think a more complicated movie than the talk about it has suggested.
I'd agree with that.
Isn't that always the case?
Yeah.
I would agree that the conversation it's more just the conversation that people are having around it that bores me. I could probably have a conversation with you about it and we get somewhere.
Well, the annoying thing is it's like a meta conversation, it's not even a conversation about Joker.
We're talking about what people are going to think about it and what people are going to say about it.
Right. And then people are saying, oh, the leftists who like this movie are being insincere or contrarian and blah, blah, blah. Or like, you're crazy if you think this movie's dangerous. And, it's just on and on and on.
And you're just like, guys, move on. Talk about something better.
Why so serious?
Yeah. Well, don't worry. There's people on my Facebook feed who are really feeling the masterpiece vibe of Joker. So, yeah, I'm gonna get I'm just gonna insult parts of the audience, whoever's listening. But if you think it's a masterpiece, you're fucking fool. Like, I'll just say that.
Yeah.
That's some white elephant art, if I've ever heard of it.
Yeah. Oh, it's some hardcore white elephant. I saw I think it was it Graham Carter? Somebody there was like Joker's white elephant art and Venom is termite art. I thought that was funny. I forgot who tweeted it though, but shout out to that person. But yeah, no, if you think it's a masterpiece, you're dumb.
5 bags of popcorn and 2 white elephants.
And Ant-Man, which I get the residuals for. All right. Well, we're at 40 minutes, so we're gonna have to. Did you like the Shia LaBeouf movie?
It's pretty good. It's not bad. Yeah.
All right, cool.
He should have played the Joker.
Yeah. Oh, I'd watch that too. That'd be cool. I'd watch Rob Zombie directing Shia LaBeouf as the Joker.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Pitch it. Get Zach in the ring.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with Paranormal Activity after this.
Hey, Cinematary listeners. Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout-outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month, in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
High def camera on. My girlfriend Katie, she thinks there's something in the house. I don't know.
You believe me, right?
I think we're gonna have a very interesting time capturing whatever paranormal phenomena is occurring or is not occurring. Windows are locked, doors are locked, alarm is on. Hearing a weird sound.
Something's here. I feel it breathing on me.
And we're back with part 2 of episode 269 of Cinematary. In this part, we'll be talking about 2007's Paranormal Activity as part of our found footage horror series. It was written and directed by Oren Peli and stars Katie Featherston and I wonder if he calls himself Mika as well in real life. Mika Sloat. Soon after moving into a suburban tract home, Katie and Mika become increasingly disturbed by what appears to be a supernatural presence. Hoping to capture evidence of it on film, they set up video cameras in the house but are not prepared for the terrifying events that follow. Attempting to focus on believability rather than action and gore, Peli chose to shoot the picture with a home video camera. In deciding on a more raw and stationary format, the camera was almost always sitting on a tripod or being held by Sloat. In eliminating the need for a camera crew, a, quote, higher degree of plausibility was created for the audience as they were, quote, more invested in the story and the characters. Peli says that the dialogue was, quote, natural because there was no real script. Instead, the actors were giving outlines of the story and situations to improvise, a technique known as retroscripting, also used in the making of the Blair Witch Project. In casting the movie, Peli auditioned a few hundred people before finally meeting Katie and Mika. He originally auditioned them individually and later called them back to audition together. Peli was impressed with the chemistry between the actors, saying, quote, if you saw the audition footage, you would have thought that they had known each other for many years. The film was shot out of sequence due to Pelle's self-imposed 7-day shooting schedule. Though Pelle would have preferred the story unfold for the actors as he had envisioned it, Sloat, who controlled the camera for a good deal of the film, was a former cameraman at his university's TV station. Quote, It was a very intense week, Pelle said, stating that the film would be shot day and night, edited at the same time, and would have the visual effects applied to it as the acting footage was being finalized. Multiple endings of the film were conceived, but not all of them were shot. So we can go into that. I have the write down of the 3 of the original ending, the studio ending, and the unfilmed ending. We can talk a little about that because they're all kind of funny in their own different ways. Attempting to find a distributor for the film and or directing partner for Pelle, the agency sent out DVDs of the movie to as many people in the industry as they could, and it was eventually seen by Miramax Film senior executive Jason Blum, who thought it had potential. He worked with Pelle to re-edit the film and submitted it to the Sundance Film Festival, but it was rejected. The DVD was also impressed DreamWorks executives Adam Goodman, Stacey Snider, and finally Steven Spielberg, who cut a deal with Blum and Pelle. DreamWorks' plan was to remake the film with a bigger budget, with Pelle directing, and only to include the original version as an extra when the DVD was eventually released. Quote, They didn't know what to do with the original, said Blum. They just wanted to be in business with Pelle. Blum and Pelle agreed, but stipulated a test screening of the original film before going ahead with the remake, believing it would be well received by a theatrical audience. During the screening, people began walking out. Goodman thought the film was bombing until he learned that the viewers were actually leaving because they were so frightened. He then realized that remake was unwise. In 2009, the New York Times said, It works best when it comes out of nowhere, because that's, in the end, where it goes. Thanks, A.O. Scott. The LA Times in 2009 said Pelle works at mining the unknown, the unknowable, like a minimalist, using small moments and virtually no special effects exceedingly well. In 2009, Roger Ebert said, It illustrates one of my favorite points that silence and waiting can be more entertaining than frantic fast-cutting and berserk FX. For extended periods here, nothing at all is happening, and believe me, you won't be bored. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about Paranormal Activity, which I feel like probably outside of Blair Witch is, kind of one of the most touchstone, go-to found footage films of the genre.
For sure.
The big franchise.
It's the big franchise. But I think it's kind of interesting because, as it seems like has been the case with a lot of the movies we've talked about in this series so far, which kind of spawn off multiple sequels, this one has definitely become its own entity on its own. But this one definitely does kind of feel like it has that homegrown quality that a lot of the other movies that we've talked about so far have, including Blair Witch, which we talked about previously. Andrew, I'm going to start with you because
I was interested to hear about how it was like a truly independent film before it just got handed to Blumhouse.
Yeah, no, it kind of has an interesting upbringing. But Andrew, I wanted to start with you. I know that you watched this recently and were really, really high on it. So yeah, give us a little idea on your feelings toward Paranormal Activity.
Yeah, I saw it 2 years ago. I guess I rewatched it 2 years ago because I also saw it soon after it came out on DVD. But when I was doing a bunch of research for my Guns and Horror Movies video essay, this was one of the films that I watched but didn't end up using because it was completely irrelevant. But I was really blown away by it. And in the podcast 2 years ago, I gave a pitch for it that probably more enthusiastic than I have the energy to give right now. But the TLDR version is that I really like how naturalistic it is. I think that these two actors give great performances in capturing this really toxic relationship, and I think the movie has some interesting things to say about how toxic relationships deal with one party dealing with trauma that they came into the relationship not really sharing. And I also like some of the slow cinema techniques that get used in the tripod sections of the film, because for so much of this you are just looking at people sleeping and your eyes are given time to scan the room and look for things that might be moving, and in doing that I think that smaller things become scarier. You know, a door moving just a little bit can be a little scary. A strange shadow going across the door, coming from seemingly nothing, can be kind of scary. And then when these really big like booms happen, or people being thrown around, or doors slamming happen, that's even more jarring than it would be in a standard horror film. So I think that the way this kind of fluctuates the tone and the dynamics, the intensity of the film is really interesting. And I also just love that shot. I love the night vision shot of the bedroom, how it has that fisheye lens on it, and it's like just a little bit askew, and there's just enough shadow in all the corners of it where you feel like you can kind of see stuff, but you can't quite see it. So it really has you leaning forward and inspecting the frame very intently. And so for all, A.O. Scott saying that it goes nowhere and almost nothing happens in it, I find it, intensely compelling and interesting. So yeah, that's basically my take. I'm also interested to talk about this movie in relation to the other found footage styles that you guys have talked about in the series so far, because there are some interesting, or interesting is maybe not the right word, but there are a lot of instances of cheating that I didn't necessarily catch the first go around. But Zach, Nathan, what did y'all just think of the film in general?
So one thing that's really interesting to me about this movie, and I just watched it for this podcast the first time, but I had always been a little bit interested in watching it, especially since after hearing you speak so highly about it a couple years ago, Andrew, because it had such an interesting release. We talked about, it's sort of the few years it kind of took to get a wide release, but the wide release itself was really, really interesting, and I actually remembered it, happening. I think I was just beginning my freshman year of high school when this movie came out. And I remember reading, at that time I kind of read a lot of just like pop culture blogs and stuff.
Came out on Halloween.
And so I remember them, kind of covering this movie with a lot of hype, because what Paramount did was they opened it in like 12 college towns first. And I remember watching and being really freaked out by the trailer, which was not of any footage of the film, but just like people in the audience, freaking out, filmed in night vision. And I remember being just because it doesn't really show anything, it was the reason why I was so scared of it, I think. But I remember being really freaked out by it and talking to some kid in my math class who had gone to see it, and he was like, "Oh man, that was nothing." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm too scared to see it." But so after it came out in a few college towns one weekend, and they released those trailers, they started an online campaign on Eventful.com where you could click a button that said "Demand It," and it would give a vote to showing Paranormal Activity in your area. So
but it eventually played everywhere, right?
Yeah, it did.
I lived in Nowheresville, Tennessee, and we got it.
Yeah, it did, but it took a couple of weeks. It started opening at the end of September and kind of rolled out throughout October, and then once the hype was really, really bubbling, it got a full wide release. And, that's not something that happens that often. It does have, it did become a studio movie, but, as we talked about, it has those independent origins, and it had that sort of grassroots marketing campaign, which is just super fascinating. And, it's like the Blair Witch, they both were doing very different things in their format and how they presented themselves, and but also, in the marketing and how they generated hype, they were really, really both kind of canny in their use of the internet. Because I feel like Paranormal Activity was kind of a Facebook movie almost. People sharing the trailer and posting about it on Facebook. I kind of feel like I remember that, and it seems like that played a big part in that movie. So it was exciting to watch this movie and see that it was actually worth that kind of hype, that it is a really good movie for the totally agree with everything that you said, Andrew, about its depiction of a toxic relationship is really interesting. You have these kind of annoying characters, very annoying characters, like you do in Blair Witch, but the relationship is just a lot more interesting because it's not just like, these people who are making a movie together. It's this couple, and, there's this weird kind of power dynamic, I feel like, that's sort of unspoken, where he is a day trader and she is a teacher, and they have this house with all these...
She's in school to be a teacher. Right. She's not even a teacher yet.
She's a student, and they have this house with all these guest rooms and stuff. And so it's kind of like, he's just sort of mean to her and like ignores her requests and her needs a lot in the movie. And so there's just sort of this weird, uneven ground that they're very clearly standing on.
Well, it's like a playful, like he has this playful rapport with her, but like the way in which he's teasing her is always like, hey, do a striptease for the camera, or hey, let's have sex and film it. Like, and she doesn't want to do those things, but she's also like, she's gotten used to this back and forth to where she just kind of plays it off and laughs about it constantly. So it doesn't seem like she's being, I don't know if abused is the right word, but she doesn't act like she's in distress, but we can see from an outside perspective, like, oh, this is bad. This is really bad.
Yeah. It's like a little at the very, like a little coercive, I feel like kind of there. And it feels like such a believable couple to me. Like these feel like the kind of people that I went to high school with grown up, and like they just look and sound like just the kind of very normal sort of flat people that like, I don't know, you see around all the time and and whatever, not to be mean to people, but like
not to, they just my takeaway from this movie was that like, white people are boring.
Dude, the scenes where he's like filming his guitar are hysterical to me. This guy is just hilarious in how much of a child he is.
Yeah, they're like sense of, I don't know, there's like the economics of the movie is super interesting to me. Just like thinking about this movie being made in 2007 before the financial crisis, really kicked off, and then coming out after that, and like, they're in.
He says he buys the camera with half of what he makes in a day.
Yeah.
And it's like a real, high-tech movie camera.
Yeah, and he obviously, works in stocks, and they have just like, it feels like the platonic ideal of a home that would have been foreclosed on.
It looks like a model home.
Yeah, just totally like bland furnishings, no thought at all put into the like anything. It's just a suburban home, and it's like the ghost. Yeah, the ghost is like like calling to collect on their debt.
The ghost is the I like that. That kind of like plays in perfectly though for like what the movie's trying to do, because like I'm thinking about some of the other ones that we've talked about, and there kind of has been, except for I guess Wreck last week, I mean, there's been like this kind of built up mythology around it, and there's not really too much like actual mythology in this, other than that Katie has this like kind of history with the supernatural that seems like that's what's connecting with her, but it's not like there's like long.
It's a demon who's decided to haunt her because reasons. I mean, it doesn't give you anything more than that.
It's not like there's no like there's no sacred Indian burial grounds. There's no like there's nothing crazy outside of the realm that like has to make it something bigger than what it is. I mean, it's literally just that this demon is coming after her. That's it.
Thematically, the movie is very much pushing the reading that like. It says the demon feeds off of negative energy, and there's the scene where they find the photo they've taken where his face is bashed in, and so it's the toxic energy of the relationship is like what the demon is feeding off of. But there's, like you said, there's no like cosmic mythos around it. It's not trying to explain why or how, but there is like an artistic intent underneath the fact that it's there.
No, exactly. It's just like thinking of comparing it, like you mentioned, comparing it in terms of style. It feels much more in kinship with Wreck, which is kind of just tossing and even to an extent Ghostwatch, where it's just kind of using the technology and tossing you into this narrative that doesn't really expand out too much, while something like Noroi was like much more expansive and had like this deep mythology linked to it, which could be viewed as a disservice that to how it ends up being. I like that this. The LA Times was the review that called it minimalist. I like that it is so minimalist because I feel like that besides also being under 90 minutes, which is the other key for the found footage genre, I think kind of keeping it relatively minimalist is what makes it effective. Like not having too much built in and just kind of keeping it short. It's still incredibly effective.
I do feel like I could watch hours of this stuff, honestly. Like I could watch the full Mika tapes unedited. Because there's...
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to go with this, to talk about how edited it is. Because I wasn't on the Rec episode, but I did watch Rec this week just to catch up with it because I had never seen it. And I really do agree with what you guys had to say about it last week, and just about how interesting it is that like that is all the footage. It's everything that got recorded is in that movie, theoretically. And it's sort of like the most pure version of a found footage film. No explanation of how the footage was found, no like cheating around like fancy editing or using multiple cameras or anything like that. It's just, here's a bunch of raw footage back to back with no explanations of like where the jump cuts happen and things like that. And rewatching Paranormal Activity like a couple days after watching Rec, I was struck by just how much editing there is in this movie. Like constant little fades to black, constant little dissolves from one shot to a slightly different version of that shot. Like there will be a conversation and one person will be talking and then the shot will not move, but it will fade and then the other person will be talking. And so I guess that's meant to imply that there's just a lot of gaps that are being filled in here. And of course, during the night sequences, there has to be editing because we're not actually going to watch, 12 hours or however long of them sitting there sleeping. So it speeds up the footage. But this is definitely a movie where you ask yourself, like, well, who edited this? Right. And why did they make the choices they made? Because there are parts of it that seem very haphazard. Like it opens with him just like filming the TV with like a rock concert playing, and then him like filming himself in the mirror. And like if you were to make a theatrical cut of all this footage, this stuff that you would leave out, but there's so much visible editing going on in the film. What did you guys make of that?
Well, it's kind of like, it's almost, I don't know, you think about the sort of narrative that a found footage movie has to have. Like, I don't know, there's always this sort of learning to become familiar with the camera and the environment a little bit, like, and so you have him at the beginning learning to use the camera and just shooting the random shit like you were saying. And I don't know, I don't really know where I'm going with this thought, but it just feels like there is this sort of, by this point of making this movie, like there's this kind of generic expectation of like what a found footage movie should be and the kind of narrative it needs to have and the sort of structure it needs to have. Like, I don't know, it just feels a little bit like more aware of the limits of the genre, or at least like what people expect from the genre, than movies we've watched previously, to me.
Speaking of them learning to use the camera, I really like the scenes of him re-watching the old footage and using the camera to record his computer screen watching the footage that he took on the camera, and like going in Audacity and looking back through, scrubbing back through the audio clips that he's gathered. Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Audacity. The interesting thing to me, thinking about this, and because I think, even though Rec kind of has the camera on the shoulder, like running around the house, which this kind of has to an extent as well, as while also having like the tripod shots. I was thinking of this kind of as the house movie in comparison to Ghost Watch, which has all of the different cameras like set up in the house. And this doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with what happens in Paranormal Activity specifically, but I just kind of thinking about the genre from how we've watched it from its beginning to now, and then I'm sure we'll get into this as well next week with Unfriended. But I'm thinking now with like the array of other devices that like are in what would be a prototypical household in terms of technology, from like the Amazon Alexa to just kind of to like the doorbell. What is that called? The doorbell camera thing.
Ring.
Yeah, like just there's so many different devices and cameras, and like the connectivity of like where you can control like your lights and your air conditioning and everything through. Like I don't know. I feel like
things that are watching you all the time.
Yeah, I just feel like there's like a natural next step for found footage. To go back to my connection to slow cinema, I don't think I talked about this when I talked about Paranormal Activity a couple years ago, but I watched that I think within a couple months of reading Paul Schrader's new edition of Transcendental Style. And in the beginning, in the intro that he writes for that new edition, there is that memeable diagram that he makes, the Tarkovsky ring, where he talks about the three different areas or the three different directions that slow cinema can go in the future, and one of them is the surveillance cam. And I think that there are a few movies that do the surveillance cam with as much intent as Paranormal Activity does. And I agree with you, Zach. I would love to see another version of this or a riff on this that's like all taken through footage of Amazon Alexa or your Xbox One's watching you or whatever.
The sequels, though, start to like get into that, because one of them, there's the Xbox Connect shows up.
Okay,
and then
good.
There's like the I mean, it's not quite the same, but like the oscillating fan cam and stuff, and these sort of developments in technology.
Which some of those are made by Justin Schulman, the guys who made Nerve and Catfish.
Yes.
So I'm really interested to dig into those.
Yeah, and it was on the note of technology. It's just really striking watching this now, like how complicated the technological setup is. Like he's because like constantly mentions his FireWire cable that he has to have plugged in from his camera, to upload the footage onto his laptop. And just thinking about now, how like easy it would be to record your just like your whole environment.
Well, that's kind of where my thinking was coming from, was that I don't know why I was harder on this movie than the other ones, but I was just kind of like thinking about this is 2007, like the immediate progressions of a lot of the devices that he's using in order to document this.
I mean, I think it's just like it's one of those things where it's just like a lot of these sort of digital cusp movies, that are so obviously in these that come out in these eras of real transition and how movies are being made and distributed. Sometimes they just like certain things, just can't help but age about them because the technology changes so much. And so I feel like this is just sort of,
which we'll talk about with Unfriended next week.
Yeah. Like this is sort of still just like, this is such a, the internet is still a separate place kind of movie. Like it's still,
guys, I guess the only talk about the internet is when he looks up that website about the last woman to be haunted by this demon.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just like, once, not to point ahead to next week, but, once you get into Unfriended, it's like there is no more distinction between
those are things offline
and reality. It's all that. And here is there's still that divide, which you both see kind of in the technological formats and stuff and the stuff that happens in the movie, but also in how it's made. Like the edits are such a clear sort of like dividing line, I feel like, between technology and reality, where it's clearly saying some human being is in control of this in some way. And so it's not just like a ghost or demon like somehow delivered this footage to your screen. So that does make this I don't know, it does give the experience a little bit of like clinical distance almost, because it feels like a case study or something.
Well, two random thoughts that I had jumping off of that. One, and this is slightly unrelated to your point. One is that our friends Jordan and Paige, who contribute to the site every now and then, recently got a rabbit.
Or are haunted by a demon.
They're not haunted by a demon, but they recently got a rabbit, and they bought like a pet monitor for their rabbit, and they can just pull up on an app like a live feed of what their rabbit is doing at any given time. And, you know, I've been out with them and they like pull up the app and there's like some creepy blue silhouette of the rabbit because it's dark and the light is in a specific place that just makes it look very eerie. And it reminded me of Paranormal Activity. Like, just there is something really creepy about, again, these sort of like always on devices that are just watching you.
Yeah. Well, it's, I mean, like I know people who have like the camera to like watch for packages and stuff. Like, I just feel like there's so that you won't even have to be in the house necessarily to like instill the fear moments, because you can be on your phone but still connected to like what's happening in
and
there.
I remember an article that came out last year, the year before, that was about people getting rid of those because they were starting to be freaked out by them, because they would keep getting alerts on their phone saying there's an intruder at the door, but really it was just somebody dropping off a package, or it was a squirrel running by the camera or something like that. Like, there's just a sense of heightened anxiety around these sorts of feeds. And of course, you know, Paranormal Activity is not, like you were saying, Nathan, not an automated feed like that, but it's a guy who's kind of jerry-rigged his own weird always on feed.
Yeah. Well, now it's like he would probably just like live stream it or something, you know?
Yeah.
Or like, you know, the Twitch
Watch my
stream.
demon on Twitch. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know, maybe that, I mean, they're supposed to be developing a new Paranormal Activity movie, and maybe they should just like cut out the theaters and just go straight to Twitch.
Honestly, that would make more sense, and I bet more people would watch it.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, there's kind of you think about that, there's probably a way to do a really compelling ghost sort of demons supernatural story.
Definitely, because of like the billions and millions of people who
and
are
I
watching
feel like
Twitch.
There's one that should be jumping out at me, but maybe just the third Unfriended movie needs to be about Twitch.
One, you know, I'm sure that with Unfriended we'll probably talk a lot more about, like, you know, the future of found footage, but that is something where it's like, you know, it just becomes harder and harder to replicate those sort of like authentic experiences where, you know, watching this, that's not real, but like, you know, for a second in 2009, people were kind of like, well, maybe it is real, or, you know, it was really scary because that reality was newer, or, you know, it had a kind of new way of presenting reality. So you know, in order to have that kind of authentic experience again, I do think you maybe have to go to like some of those spaces where it seems a little less governed, where like somebody could just stumble upon a random Twitch stream and like see something fucked up for a second.
Because that is the anxiety that it's tapping into, I guess. Like, have you ever wondered what happens in your house while you're asleep? Like,
it's like Toy Story.
Before the age of, you know, Xbox Connect watching you can't know that. But we're like right on the edge of being able to know that at any time, which is bizarre.
No, I was just laughing at Nathan saying it was like Toy Story.
What were you about to say?
It's evil Toy Story.
It's like Toy Story.
There should be like a toy, like, this is totally off topic, but like tech story, like your phone comes to life, your computer comes to life, your TV comes to life when you leave the house. Like Toy Story meets Sausage Party meets
I think they did the
Unfriended.
Emoji Movie.
Yeah, but this would be...
Yeah, I think that's called the Emoji Movie.
This is not emojis. This is your literal
with the
phone.
voices of Tim Allen, James Woods as your doorknob.
Why are you only hiring
That's your
canceled
doorknob
people?
camera.
This is not the Expendables of canceled people.
Amy
canceled
Poehler
conservatives.
as your Amazon Alexa.
Oh, that's a very good casting. She would absolutely play the Amazon Alexa.
I could see that movie happening.
So last thing I want to say, since it seems like we're wrapping up on this, is to kind of go back to comparing it to Rec and talking about how pure of found footage this is. I was amused when Rec ended, and we had just seen this really gritty, pure found footage thing, and then the credits start rolling, and this like metal song, like this Spanish metal song starts playing, and I'm like, oh, I've been completely taken out of it. But the extra textuals kind of around Paranormal Activity are really interesting. Like, I just tweeted it before we recorded, but the Blu-ray menu screen is just a black screen with two phrases. One says play movie and one says play movie with alternate ending, and it's just like an American typewriter, like white font. And
that's like the first title card in the movie is that same kind of
exactly
font, right?
And then the movie ends, and there's not credits. There's like 2 minutes of silent black screen.
Wow.
And then the Blu-ray anyway then like jumps to another video file. So like the runtime ends when that black screen ends. But then there's like a second video file that automatically gets loaded up after that does have credits. But even those credits are in that, it's silent. It's just the white American typewriter thing, and it just kind of like scrolls really quickly. And it's thanking a bunch of people who either like supported the film financially, or maybe were like asking for it to be put in theaters or something. It's like a fan shout out credit sequence. But they really do commit to making it at least appear packaging wise like, hey, this is just some footage that we have found. Even though, like we said, there's all the weird editing stuff that happens in the middle of it.
That reminds me to mention the 3 different endings that I guess this movie was going to have.
Okay, yeah, so I've seen 2 of them.
Yeah, the original ending was they have like the kerfuffle downstairs, and then Katie comes up and she's like rocking back and forth on the bed with a knife in her hand for 2 days, and then her friend calls.
That's the original that doesn't get.
This is the original. This was scrapped after one showing. So then her friend comes over, and then like they have another kerfuffle where she like goes downstairs. She's like, ah, and then Katie comes back up and has like blood all over her, whatever, and resumes like rocking back and forth. And then the police come over. This is where it kind of like takes it like another level. Like the police come over, hit like Mika's body. She wakes up from her state and is like confused, and she still has the knife in her hand. Then she doesn't drop the knife, and it ends up like the police like shoot her, and then it just like leaves with like them shooting her and them investigating the area with the camera still running. And I was just like, well, that just escalated.
Probably a good idea to scrap that ending.
Yeah, I was just like, all right, well, yeah. I'm just like, first off, they're not gonna do that to a white lady, and then second off, it's a little much. Studio ending, which I guess is the alternate ending if you watch it on your DVD or whatever, is she returns to the bedroom after the whole thing. She's like has covered in blood with the knife. She like locks the door, and then she smiles at the camera and then cuts her own throat, and it fades to black.
Stupid ending. I'm glad that that's not the one that they went with.
And then the unfilmed ending, which I guess they came up with but decided not to do it, was which I don't know, I kind of like this one. Just like this is more like the theory like of like just the digital like angle of it. But so she's possessed and she corners him and bludgeons him to death with his camera, and the viewers watch it from the camera's point of view, but they deemed it too complicated and too brutal. But I was like, that's honestly like the best, is he dies by his camera.
I mean, yeah, because
the audience might be asking like, how is the footage not damaged if she did this?
Sure, but
I would have liked to see that ending.
Those are the endings that were, and then of course the one that's there,
and then of course the one that's actually there. Yeah,
it's just her like,
which is pretty good. Yeah, I mean it's a good jump at the end.
It's a good jump.
I was scared.
So yeah, any final thoughts on Paranormal Activity?
Good movie, IMO.
Cool. Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, at Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we put all of the movies that we talked about in this episode on there. And of course, you can go over to Patreon patreon.com/cinematary if you would like to support the show and our wonderful writers. Like I said at the top, we have a bunch of big festival coverage coming through, so this is the perfect time to jump on, listen to some film theory and chill episodes, and it's $5, as Andrew says in his little thing. Give up one fancy coffee, and you can get some really silly but also interesting film theory discussions and support some people who are going to film festivals that and doing a lot of effort in writing. So just consider it. Toss that mochaccino latte from Starbucks. Whatever.
That Dunkachino.
Dunk that Dunkachino, man. Next week, though, as we mentioned in the episode, we're going to be completing this series with 2014's Unfriended. So check it out. We're going to be bringing this to a head. And then I have not. I'm excited.
Have you seen Unfriended, Zach?
I'm pumped to go. I've been wanting to watch
All
it, so
right.
I'm glad. This is a good excuse. So
here we go.
Can we used to do this, record this on Skype. Can we do Skype for it?
Oh, we need the Skype effect.
Video call.
Yeah, let's Skype video call for it. I mean, this has no effect on the listeners, but
Can we put it on YouTube?
Well, you want to know something funny?
Sure.
The very first time I saw
Let's
Unfriended,
do it.
I was watching it on my laptop, and I believed that earlier that day we had recorded an episode of Cinematary. I do not know which one, but my Skype window was still open. It's only usually open if we are recording a podcast episode, and literally right as the movie ended, it made a notification noise. And it was so fucking scary. The next time I saw the movie, it was a lot funnier. But the first time
we watched it in a theater. We went into an auditorium at UT and we watched it.
Yeah, that was a great
So I've never
time.
watched it on a laptop screen. That's how I will be watching it.
Well, I'm just gonna probably watch it on my TV. So
Wow.
watch
it on your phone.
Ooh, I'm gonna do it. All right. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.